The first time it happened, I dismissed it. A restless night, I thought. A new health kick. Sarah had always been prone to fads. One month it was keto, the next it was hot yoga. The month after that, it was a solemn vow to only consume foods that were green. So when her alarm, a gentle chime that was somehow more jarring than a siren in the 4 a.m. silence, went off, and she slipped out of bed, I barely registered it. I mumbled something, a half-conscious question, and she whispered back, "Just going for a walk, honey, to clear my head." I rolled over, pulling the warmth of the duvet into the space she had vacated, and fell back asleep, the scent of her lavender pillow spray the only lingering trace of her presence. It was the second time, 2 days later, that the first tiny, insidious splinter of unease lodged itself in my mind. The same gentle chime, the same rustle of fabric in the dark, the same soft click of the bedroom door. This time, I was more awake. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of our house in a new, unsettling context. The creak of the third step on the staircase, the soft thud of the front door closing. The house fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was an empty silence, a hollow one. For 19 years, the silence of our home at night had been a comfort, a shared space of quiet intimacy. Now it felt like a void. I'm Alex, an architect. My life is built on foundations, on blueprints, on the predictable and reassuring physics of stress and load. I design structures that are meant to last, to weather storms. My marriage to Sarah, I had always believed, was the most solid structure I had ever built. 19 years, a beautiful 16-year-old daughter, Maya, a home in a leafy suburb that smelled of cut grass and security. It was a good life, a solid life, or so I thought. By the end of the first week, the 4 a.m. walks had become a routine. Her routine, not ours. It created a fissure in the landscape of our marriage. I would wake up to the chime, lie in the growing silence, and find myself unable to fall back asleep. I'd listen for the sound of her key in the lock. An hour, sometimes 90 minutes later, she would slip back into the house, her cheeks flushed from the cold morning air, a bright, almost manic energy about her. "It's amazing, Alex," she'd say, pulling off her running shoes. "The world is so quiet. It's like I have it all to myself. It's the only time I can really think." I tried to be supportive. I really did. "That's great, honey," I'd say, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you found something that makes you happy." But my words felt like counterfeit currency. What was she thinking about that required such solitude? Weren't we supposed to be the ones who thought things through together? We had built a life on shared thoughts, shared dreams, shared anxieties. When had she started needing to have the world to herself? Small things started to change, accumulating like dust in the corners of our life. She was more protective of her phone, which was now always face down on the counter or clutched in her hand. She had a new password, and when I casually asked about it, she'd laughed it off. "Oh, Maya was messing with it. I just put in something random. I can't even remember what it is." But I saw the way her fingers danced over the screen, a fluid, practiced motion. She started wearing new workout clothes, sleeker and more expensive than her usual faded sweatpants. "Just treating myself," she'd explained when I mentioned a particularly bright pink top. "Makes me feel motivated." Our conversations became minefields of unspoken tension. I tried to breach the growing distance. "Is everything okay, Sarah? You seem distant." She would look at me, her eyes wide with a carefully constructed innocence that was more infuriating than an open admission of guilt. "I'm fine, Alex. Just tired. These early mornings, you know?" Then she would turn the tables, a tactic she had perfected over the years. "Maybe you're the one who's distant. You're always so wrapped up in your work. We barely even talk anymore, unless it's about bills or Maya's school schedule." There was a sliver of truth to it, enough to make me second-guess myself. I had been busy. A big project, a new municipal library, was consuming my days and often my nights. I was stressed, preoccupied. Was this my fault? Had I been so focused on building a physical legacy that I'd let the architecture of my own marriage crumble? The guilt was a heavy cloak, and for a while I wore it. I made more of an effort. I suggested date nights, but she was always too tired. "Let's just stay in and watch a movie," she'd say, only to fall asleep on the couch 20 minutes in, her phone slipping from her lax fingers. I'd pick it up, my own fingers itching with the desire to press the home button, to search for a truth I was terrified to find. But I never did. Not then. The breaking point, or rather the point where my suspicion hardened into a cold, heavy certainty, came about a month into the new regimen. It was a Saturday. She had gone for her walk, and I was in the kitchen making coffee, the rich aroma doing little to soothe my frayed nerves. Maya came downstairs, her face pale, her eyes puffy. "Is Mom okay?" she asked, her voice small. "She's fine, sweetie. Just out for her walk. Why?" Maya hesitated, twisting a strand of her long, dark hair. "Last night, I heard her on the phone, in the laundry room. She was whispering. She sounded happy, but also, secretive. When I walked past, she hung up really fast and said she was just talking to Aunt Carol." Aunt Carol was Sarah's sister, who lived in Oregon and was usually asleep at what would have been 11 p.m. her time. My heart began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. "What did you hear her say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady.
I don't know, just something about tomorrow morning and the usual place. Then she laughed. It was a weird laugh, not like her usual one. The usual place. The words echoed in the cavernous space that had opened up in my chest. Her walks weren't aimless wanderings to clear her head. There was a destination, a usual place, and a person she was meeting there. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay beside her, a stranger in my own bed, and felt the chasm between us. She smelled of lavender and lies. I watched the numbers on the digital clock change with agonizing slowness. 3:55, 3:58, 4 a.m. The gentle chime, the rustle of clothes, the click of the door. This time, I didn't stay in bed. I slipped out, dressed in the dark, my movements clumsy with a mixture of rage and fear. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I crept to the garage, eased the door up manually to avoid the noise of the motor, and backed out into the silent, ink-black street. I was going to follow her. I needed to see. I needed to know what had stolen my wife from our bed at 4 a.m. The pre-dawn world was a ghost town. Streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the only sound was the hum of my engine. I kept my distance, my headlights off, my heart pounding a frantic drum solo against my sternum. Sarah was easy to follow, a lone figure in bright pink, walking with a purpose I'd never seen in her before. She wasn't meandering. She was heading somewhere specific. She turned off her main road, heading towards the old part of town, an area we rarely visited, with a small park and a river walk that was notoriously unlit and deserted at this hour. My mind raced, constructing scenarios, each one more painful than the last. Who was she meeting? Someone from her past? A colleague? A complete stranger? The not knowing was a physical agony, a tightening in my gut that made me feel sick.
She reached the entrance to the park, a wrought iron gate that was always left unlocked. She glanced over her shoulder, a quick, furtive movement, and for a terrifying second, I thought she'd seen me. I ducked down in my seat, my breath catching in my throat. But she saw nothing, just the empty street behind her. She slipped through the gate and disappeared into the darkness of the trees. I parked the car a block away and followed on foot, my sneakers silent on the damp pavement. The air was cold and bit at my exposed skin. I felt like a spy in my own life, a pathetic cliché of a jealous husband. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to go home and pretend this wasn't happening, to cling to the wreckage of my denial. But my feet kept moving, propelled forward by a grim, self-destructive need for the truth. I entered the park. It was even darker under the canopy of the old oaks. A narrow path wound its way towards the river. I could hear the faint sound of the water rushing over stones. And then I heard another sound. Voices. A low murmur, followed by a soft, feminine laugh that was achingly familiar. It was Sarah's laugh. But it wasn't the tired, strained laugh I heard at home. This was the laugh I remembered from our first years together. Light, carefree, and full of a joy that I hadn't been able to inspire in her for a very long time. I crept closer, using the thick trunk of a weeping willow as cover. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and then I saw them. They were standing on a small wooden footbridge that arched over a narrow creek feeding into the main river. Sarah, my wife of 19 years, the mother of my child, was wrapped in the arms of another man. His back was to me, but I could see he was tall and lean. His hand was stroking her hair as she looked up at him, her face illuminated by the faint glow of a distant security light. The expression on her face was one of pure adoration. It was a look she once reserved for me, a look I hadn't seen directed my way in years. It was a knife twisting in my gut. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a quick, furtive peck. It was a long, slow, passionate kiss, the kind that speaks of deep intimacy and shared secrets. I stood there, frozen, hidden in the shadows, a silent, unwilling spectator to the complete and utter demolition of my world. I couldn't breathe. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the park, out of the world. I saw him pull back, saw him whisper something in her ear that made her smile, a genuine, radiant smile. In that moment, I realized that the woman I had been living with, sleeping next to, was a stranger. The life I thought was a solid, dependable structure was nothing but a facade, a hollow shell, and I was just standing in the rubble. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. My body wouldn't obey my brain's furious commands. All I could do was watch for another minute as they held each other, their bodies silhouetted against the first faint blush of dawn. Then, with a final, lingering kiss, they parted. He went one way, deeper into the park, and Sarah turned and started walking back towards the gate, back towards our home, back towards me. I stumbled back to my car, my legs like lead, my mind a screaming vortex of pain and betrayal. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I parked in the garage, slipped back into the house, and was standing in the kitchen, staring blindly at the coffee maker when she came in, her cheeks flushed, that same bright, false energy crackling around her. "Morning, sleepyhead," she chirped, kissing me on the cheek. Her lips were cold from the morning air. I flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but she didn't notice. The sunrise was absolutely gorgeous. You should come with me one morning. The casual cruelty of her words, the sheer audacity of the lie, was breathtaking.
I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my wife, but a performer playing a part. And I, the fool, had been her captive audience for God knows how long. "Maybe," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "Maybe I will." I needed a plan. Confronting her now in a storm of raw emotion would achieve nothing. She would lie, she would deflect, she would gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. I had seen them, but I had no proof that a jury of my own mind could use to convict her beyond a reasonable doubt. I needed more. I needed names, dates, evidence so concrete and undeniable that she couldn't squirm her way out of it. I needed to become an architect of her downfall. My new project was not a library of books and knowledge, but a meticulous deconstruction of a life built on deceit. And I would be methodical, I would be precise, and I would be merciless. The days that followed were the strangest and most painful of my life. I was living a dual existence. On the surface, I was Alex, the husband, the father, the architect. I went to work, I reviewed blueprints, I helped Maya with her calculus homework, I sat across the dinner table from Sarah and asked about her day. But beneath that placid surface, a different Alex was operating. A cold, calculating investigator, fueled by a potent cocktail of grief and rage. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake for hours, replaying the scene at the bridge in my mind, the image of their kiss burned onto the inside of my eyelids. My first move was to consult an old friend, Mark. He wasn't just a friend, he was a lawyer, specializing in corporate litigation, but he was sharp and, more importantly, discreet. We met for a beer at a dingy bar far from our usual haunts. The place smelled of stale beer and quiet desperation, which felt fitting. "I think Sarah's having an affair," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth.
I laid out the whole story: the 4 a.m. walks, the secretive phone, Maya's suspicions, and the scene I had witnessed in the park. Mark listened patiently, his expression growing more grim with each detail. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He was a lawyer, and he dealt in facts and strategy. "Okay, Alex," he said, leaning forward. "First things first, do not confront her. Not yet. You have a suspicion, and you have one visual confirmation that you can't prove. In a legal sense, you have nothing. She'll just deny it." "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I can't just live like this, Mark. It's eating me alive." "You gather intelligence," he said, his voice low and serious. "You become a spy in your own house. Phone records, credit card statements, emails, social media. You need a pattern. You need a name. You need irrefutable proof. This isn't just about your heart, man. This is about protecting yourself, protecting Maya, and protecting your assets. 19 years is a long time. This is going to be messy." He was right. I went home that night with a cold resolve. The emotional, heartbroken husband was locked away. The methodical architect took over. I started with the phone bill, which was easily accessible online. I cross-referenced the call logs with the times she was out for her walks. There it was. A single number, called or texted almost every morning between 4:15 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., and frequently in the evenings too, when she was supposedly in the shower or folding laundry. The number was not saved under any name in our shared contacts. I ran a reverse lookup online. The result came back: Julian Croft. The name meant nothing to me. It was a blank slate, a ghost. But now the ghost had a name. Next, the credit card statements. I logged into our joint account. I had always handled the finances, a task Sarah found tedious. She had a card for her daily expenses, which I never scrutinized. Until now. I scrolled through months of transactions. Most were mundane: groceries, gas, coffee shops. But then I saw it. A recurring charge 2 or 3 times a week from a place called the Gilded Lily, a boutique hotel with a notoriously discreet cocktail lounge on the other side of town. The charges were always late afternoon, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days she told me she was at her book club or taking an extra yoga class. Book club, yoga. The lies were so pedestrian, so insultingly simple. The Gilded Lily. The name itself felt like a mockery. Each discovery was a fresh stab wound. I felt like an archaeologist uncovering the ruins of a lost civilization, except the civilization was my own life, and the ruins were still smoking. I needed more. I needed to see their communication. This felt like the deepest betrayal of privacy, a line I never thought I'd cross. But she had crossed a far more sacred line first. I remembered an old piece of monitoring software I had installed on Maya's computer years ago when I was worried about her online activity. It was discreet, a keylogger that could email me transcripts. It was a desperate, ugly move, but I felt I had no choice. One evening when Sarah was in the shower, I managed to install it on our shared laptop, the one she used most often. It took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. My hands were sweating, my heart thumping with the fear of being caught. The next day, the first email arrived in a new, secret account I had created. It was a log of her activity from the night before. I opened it with a sense of dread. There were searches for new running shoes, a visit to a recipe website, and then she had logged into a private email account I didn't know she had. The keylogger had captured the password. My hands trembled as I typed the address and the password into the login screen. Her inbox loaded, and my world ended for the second time. It was all there, hundreds of emails between her and Julian Croft. Going back not just months, but over 2 years. 2 years. My mind reeled. This wasn't a new fling, a midlife crisis. This was a long-term, established relationship, a parallel life she had been living right under my nose. I clicked on the most recent email, sent just the day before. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain struggled to process them. "Jay, can't stop thinking about this morning. The sunrise was nice, but it had nothing on you. I live for those stolen hours. It's the only time I feel like myself. Alex is getting more suspicious, I think. He keeps asking if I'm okay, looking at me with those sad, bloodhound eyes. It's getting harder to lie to him. Sometimes I just want to scream it all and be done with it. But then I think of Maya and the fallout, and I think of losing this, losing us. I can't. See you Tuesday at the Lily. I'll wear the blue dress you like. All my love. S. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. The casual intimacy, the shared secrets, the reference to my sad bloodhound eyes. She was pitying me while she betrayed me. And the mention of Maya, using our daughter as an excuse to continue her deception, was a level of cowardice I couldn't comprehend. I scrolled through the older emails. There were declarations of love, explicit descriptions of their encounters, plans for a future together. They talked about me. They called me the warden, Mr. Predictable. They dissected my habits, my moods, my flaws. I was a character in their love story, the bumbling, oblivious husband who stood in the way of their happiness. I read about their first meeting at a charity gala I had been too busy with work to attend. I read about their first kiss in the parking garage. I read about every lie, every clandestine meeting, every stolen moment. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. As I delved deeper into the digital archaeology of my wife's secret life, I started to piece together more about this Julian Croft. He mentioned his own wife in the emails, complaining about her, using her as a justification for his affair with Sarah. He called his wife needy and clueless. And then I found a photo. It was an attachment in an email from 6 months ago. The subject line was us. I clicked on it. It was a selfie of Sarah and Julian, sitting at an outdoor cafe, smiling, their heads close together. Sarah looked happier than I had seen her in a decade. And I finally saw his face. My blood ran cold. It was a face I knew. It was Julian Croft, the husband of Sarah's best friend, Chloe. Chloe, our friend for 15 years. The woman who came over for wine and complained about her own marriage. The woman who confided in me about how distant and secretive Julian had become. She had sat in my living room, crying on my shoulder, about the man who was sleeping with my wife. The scale of the betrayal was unimaginable. It wasn't just a two-person conspiracy. It was a web of deceit that entangled our closest friends. Sarah wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically betraying her best friend every single day. I pushed back from my desk, a strangled sob escaping my lips. The room felt like it was tilting. I stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, heaving until there was nothing left. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was a stranger, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollowed out with a pain so profound it was almost surreal. The sad, bloodhound eyes. She was right. I had the proof. More proof than I had ever wanted. I had the name. I had the timeline. I had their words, their plans, their faces. The architect had his blueprints. The foundation was rotten to the core, the support beams eaten away by termites of deception. The entire structure was compromised. And now, it was time to bring it all crashing down. The day of the confrontation was a Tuesday. I chose it specifically. It was the day she was supposed to meet him at the Gilded Lily. I took the day off work, telling my secretary I had a family emergency, which was the truest thing I'd said in weeks. I sent Maya to school, kissing her goodbye at the door with a lump in my throat so large I could barely speak. "I love you, sweetie," I said, holding her for a moment too long. She looked at me, puzzled. "Love you too, Dad. Is everything okay?" "Everything will be," I lied. Sarah was in a good mood, humming as she got ready. She put on the blue dress from the email. It was a dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The irony was a bitter pill. "Book club today," she said brightly, applying a shade of lipstick that was bolder than her usual choice. "Might be home a little late. Chloe and I are going for a drink after." Chloe. She said her name without a flicker of guilt, without a hint of the monumental betrayal it represented. The coldness of it settled in my bones. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Have fun." She left at noon. I waited for 15 minutes, then I got in my car. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I had printed everything. The emails, the phone records, the credit card statements. I had even printed the selfie of her and Julian. I arranged them all on the large oak dining table, the table where we had shared thousands of family meals, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays. I laid them out like exhibits in a trial. Exhibit A, the betrayal. Exhibit B, the lies. Exhibit C, the end of everything. Then I made one phone call to Chloe. "Chloe, it's Alex," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to come over, right now. It's an emergency. It's about Julian, and it's about Sarah." There was a confused silence on the other end, then a hesitant, "Okay, I'm on my way." Chloe arrived 20 minutes later, her face etched with worry. "Alex, what is it? You're scaring me. Has something happened?" I didn't say a word.
I just led her to the dining room and gestured to the table. She walked towards it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She picked up the first sheet, a credit card statement, highlighting the charges for the Gilded Lily. Then she saw the phone records. Then she saw the emails. I watched as the color drained from her face. Her eyes scanned the pages, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. When she picked up the smiling selfie of her husband and her best friend, a small, wounded sound escaped her lips. She sank into a chair, her body trembling, her face as white as the paper she was holding. "For how long?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. 2 years, I said, the words falling like stones into the silence. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, two strangers united in the same profound betrayal. We didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the pain too raw for tears. We just sat amidst the evidence of our shattered lives. And then we heard the key in the front door. Sarah was home early. Her plan for a drink with Chloe had apparently been a lie as well. "Alex, I'm home," she called out, her voice light and cheerful. She walked into the dining room, a smile on her face that died the instant she saw us. She saw Chloe's stricken face. She saw the papers spread across the table. Her eyes darted from the evidence to my face, and in that moment, she knew. The performance was over. Her face, which had been a mask of carefree innocence moments before, crumpled. The color drained away, replaced by a ghastly, sallow pallor. "Alex," she began, her voice a weak, trembling thing. "Don't," I said, my voice low and dangerously quiet. All the rage, all the grief, all the sleepless nights had coalesced into a single point of cold, hard fury. "Don't you dare say my name." She looked at Chloe, who was staring at her with eyes full of a pain so deep it was terrifying to witness. "Chloe? I can explain."
Chloe let out a laugh, a broken, hysterical sound. "Explain? Explain what, Sarah? Explain the 2 years you've been sleeping with my husband while I cried on your shoulder? Explain how you could look me in the eye week after week, knowing you were destroying my life, my family. There is no explanation for this. There's just evil." Sarah flinched as if struck. She turned back to me, desperation flooding her features. "Alex, please, we can talk about this. We can work through it. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. This was not a mistake. This was a 2-year campaign of deception. You built an entire secret life on a foundation of lies. You mocked me, you pitied me, you used our daughter as a shield. You did it with my friend's husband, your best friend's husband. You stood in this house day after day, and you lied to my face, to Maya's face, to Chloe's face. That is not a mistake, Sarah. That is a choice, a series of thousands of choices you made every single day. Every word was a release of pressure, of the poison that had been building inside me for weeks. Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, It was as if I was looking at a complete stranger. I was lonely, she sobbed. You were never here, Alex. You were always at work, always distracted. Julian, he saw me. He listened to me. He saw an opportunity, I shot back. And you let him. You want to blame me for this? For working hard to provide for this family? For this life you were so eager to throw away? No, you don't get to do that. This is on you. All of it. Chloe stood up then, her movements stiff, robotic. She walked over to Sarah, and for a moment I thought she might strike her. Instead, she just looked at her, her eyes empty. You were my sister, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. I loved you. I trusted you.
I hope you and Julian are very happy together in whatever miserable, pathetic life you build on the ruins of this one, because you have just lost everything that ever mattered. Chloe walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of our lives, without a backward glance. The front door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a coffin lid closing. Sarah turned to me, her hands outstretched in a plea. Alex, please don't do this. Think of Maya. Think of the last 19 years. I am thinking of Maya, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. And I'm thinking how I'm going to explain to her that her mother is a liar and a cheat who broke our family because she was bored. And as for the last 19 years, right now they feel like the biggest lie of all. I want you to pack a bag, and I want you to get out of my house. Alex, no! Now, Sarah, I roared, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and full of all the pain she had inflicted. Get out! She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for a flicker of the man she used to know, the man who would have forgiven her anything. But that man was gone. He had died in a dark park at 4 a.m. She saw only the cold, hard stranger I had become. She turned, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked up the stairs. I stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage, printed out in black and white. The silence that descended was heavier and more profound than any I had ever known. It was the silence of an ending, the silence of a structure that had finally, irrevocably collapsed. Telling Maya was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. How do you explain the complexities of adult failure to a 16-year-old whose world is still largely black and white? I sat her down that evening on the couch, the empty space beside me a palpable presence. I told her the truth, gently but without sugarcoating the facts. I told her that her mother had made choices that meant we couldn't be a family anymore. I watched her beautiful, bright face crumble, saw the confusion and hurt in her eyes turn to a quiet, simmering anger. She didn't cry, not at first. She just nodded, her jaw tight. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. I knew she was lying. The fact that my own daughter had seen it before I had was another small, sharp cut. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, mediators, and the sterile, joyless process of dismantling a life. Sarah moved in with Julian, who had been unceremoniously thrown out by Chloe. They were together now, out in the open, the victors of their sordid little war. But from what I heard through the grapevine, their victory was a hollow one. Their affair, born in the thrill of secrecy and deception, withered in the harsh light of reality, bogged down by the mundanity of divorce proceedings and the judgment of their peers. They had burned down 2 families to be together, and all they had left was each other and the ashes. Chloe and I became unlikely allies, bound by our shared trauma. We met for coffee, not as friends, but as survivors, helping each other navigate the treacherous legal and emotional terrain. We talked about our children, about the future, but we rarely spoke of Sarah or Julian. Their names were like curses we dared not utter. Our bond was one of mutual respect for the pain we had endured and the quiet dignity with which we were trying to move forward. My house, once a home filled with the noise and bustle of family, became quiet, too quiet. In the silence, my anger began to cool, leaving behind a deep, profound sadness. I grieved for the marriage I had lost, but more than that, I grieved for the marriage I thought I had. I grieved for the 19 years of memories that were now tainted, forcing me to question the authenticity of every anniversary card, every shared laugh, every I love you.
Slowly, painfully, Maya and I began to build a new life, a new structure on the cleared ground of our old one. We had movie nights, just the two of us. We took up hiking, exploring the trails in the state parks on weekends. We talked more than we ever had before, our conversations honest and raw. We were a smaller family, a broken one, but we were real. There were no secrets, no whispers in the laundry room, no 4 a.m. departures. One evening, about a year after Sarah had left, my phone rang. It was her. My first instinct was to ignore it, but some part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I'd fallen in love with in college, compelled me to answer. "Alex?" Her voice was hesitant, fragile. "Sarah," I said, my tone neutral. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said, the words rushing out. "I know it's too late, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I am truly, deeply sorry for everything. For the lies, for the pain I caused you and Maya and Chloe. I was lost, and I made a terrible, selfish mess of everything. Julian and I were not together anymore. It all fell apart. It was never real, not like what we had." I listened, but the words didn't stir anything in me. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. It was like listening to a news report about a tragedy in a distant country. I felt a detached sadness for the person she had become, but her apology couldn't rebuild the city she had burned to the ground. "I appreciate the call, Sarah," I said, my voice calm. "I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. But we're moving on. Maya and I, we're okay." We said our goodbyes and I hung up the phone. There was no sense of victory, no feeling of closure. Closure, I was learning, wasn't a dramatic, movie-ending moment. It was a quiet, gradual process. It was waking up one morning and realizing you hadn't thought about her for a whole day.
It was hearing a song we used to love and feeling only a faint nostalgia instead of a sharp pang of pain. It was being able to look at a photograph of our wedding and see 2 young, hopeful kids and feel a gentle sorrow for them, for what they didn't know, instead of a bitter rage. One Saturday, I woke early. The sun was not yet up. On an impulse, I pulled on a pair of running shoes and a sweatshirt. I walked out the front door into the cool, pre-dawn air. The street was silent, bathed in the gray, liminal light between night and day. I started to walk, not with the furtive purpose of a spy or the desperate energy of a cheater, but with the steady, calm pace of a man who is finally at peace in his own skin, in his own life. I walked to the park, the same park where my world had fallen apart. I stood on the small wooden footbridge and looked down at the creek. The water flowed steadily, endlessly, on its way to the river. It didn't care about the human dramas that played out on its banks. It just kept moving forward. As I stood there, the first rays of the sun broke through the trees, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was a sunrise, a new day, a new beginning. It wasn't the life I had planned, not the blueprint I had so carefully designed, but it was my life, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was on solid ground.